Guess what? Where on earth would you find a strip of land barely 40 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide that has been continuously inhabited for over 5,000 years? A place that has been conquered by Egyptians, Philistines, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Crusaders, Mamluks, Ottomans, British, and more, in some contested valley of Central Asia, along a strategic strait connecting major seas, perhaps at a mountain pass controlling ancient trade routes. No, all wrong. The most conquered, most contested, and most layered piece of real estate on Earth relative to its size lies along the eastern Mediterranean coast, wedged between the Sinai Desert and the lands of ancient Canaan. That place is Gaza, and its history stretches far deeper than the headlines suggest. When most people hear the word Gaza today, they think of conflict. They see images of destruction, displacement, and suffering that have made this narrow strip synonymous with one of the world's most intractable political disputes. They know it as a place of walls, blockades, and seemingly endless cycles of violence. All of this shapes the present, but Gaza is not merely a conflict zone. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth, a crossroads where Africa meets Asia, where ancient trade routes converged, where empires rose and fell while the people of this narrow coastal plain endured. Beneath the rubble of modern warfare lie the remains of Philistine temples, Roman colonnades, Byzantine churches, Crusader fortifications, and Ottoman mosques. The same soil that absorbs today's tragedies holds artifacts spanning the entire arc of human civilization. This is the story of a small strip of land with a long history, a journey through millennia of human presence in a place that geography made both blessed and cursed. A testament to the endurance of people who have called this contested ground home across thousands of years. Welcome to Travel Vibes. Gaza occupies a narrow coastal strip along the southeastern Mediterranean, approximately 365 square kilometers in total area. To put this in perspective, the entire territory is smaller than the city of Detroit, smaller than the island of Guam, smaller than many international airports and their surrounding facilities. Yet within this confined space, over 2 million people currently reside, making it one of the most densely populated territories on Earth. The population density exceeds 5,000 people per square kilometer, comparable to major global cities, but spread across a territory with far less infrastructure. The geography that made Gaza significant throughout history remains visible despite modern development. The coastal plain provided agricultural land in a region where arable soil was precious. Mediterranean rains, though modest, supported cultivation of olives, grains, and vegetables. The coastline offered harbors for fishing and maritime trade. Fresh water, while limited, was more accessible here than in the surrounding deserts. Most critically, Gaza sat at the junction of continents. The collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 BCE brought dramatic changes to the entire eastern Mediterranean. Among the sea peoples who disrupted established powers were the Philistines, who settled along the southern coastal plain and gave the region the name that would eventually become Palestine. Gaza became one of the 5 principal Philistine cities, part of the Pentapolis that also included Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. These cities formed a confederation that controlled the coastal plain and frequently conflicted with the Israelite tribes settling in the hill country to the east. The biblical narrative places significant events in Gaza. The story of Samson, the Israelite strongman who loved the Philistine woman Delilah, culminates in Gaza, according to the book of Judges. The blinded Samson was brought to the temple of Dagon in Gaza, where he pulled down the pillars and killed himself along with thousands of Philistines. Whether one reads these accounts as history or legend, they testify to Gaza's importance in the ancient world. A city worth mentioning in sacred texts. A city whose temple to Dagon ranked among the significant religious structures of its time. A city that mattered. Archaeological evidence confirms Philistine presence in Gaza, though excavation has been limited by continuous occupation and, more recently, by conflict. The Philistines eventually assimilated into the broader population of the region, their distinct identity fading over centuries. But their legacy persisted in the name Palestine, derived from Philistia, the land of the Philistines. Gaza's identity as a Philistine city became part of the historical memory that subsequent civilizations inherited. The great empires of the Iron Age each sought to control Gaza, recognizing its strategic importance on the route between Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Assyrians, building the largest empire the world had yet seen, conquered Gaza in the 8th century BC. The Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III recorded his victory over the city, and subsequent Assyrian monarchs maintained control over this vital waypoint on the road to Egypt. When the Assyrian Empire collapsed in the late 7th century BCE, the Egyptians briefly reasserted control over Gaza, but the rising Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar II soon displaced Egyptian influence. The Babylonians conquered Gaza around 604 BCE, incorporating it into their imperial system. The Persian Empire, which absorbed Babylon in 539 BCE, made Gaza part of a satrapy, encompassing the entire Levant. Under Persian rule, the city continued to function as a commercial center. its merchants trading goods from Egypt, Arabia, and the Mediterranean world. The conquest of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE brought Gaza into the Greek cultural sphere. The city resisted Alexander's siege for several months. One of the longest resistances the Macedonian conqueror faced during his campaign. When the city finally fell, Alexander reportedly dealt harshly with the defenders, a testament to both the effectiveness of Gaza's resistance and the strategic importance that justified such a prolonged siege. Following Alexander's death, Gaza passed between his successors, the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt and the Seleucid dynasty of Syria. The city absorbed Greek cultural influences while maintaining its commercial importance. Hellenistic Gaza produced philosophers, poets, and scholars who contributed to the broader Greek intellectual world. The coastal road connecting Egypt to the Levant, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia passed directly through Gaza. This route, known in ancient times as the Way of the Sea and later as the Via Maris, carried armies, merchants, pilgrims, and ideas between Africa and Asia for millennia. Any powers seeking to control trade between these continents needed to control Gaza. Any army marching between Egypt and the empires of the Fertile Crescent needed to pass through or around this narrow strip. Geography made Gaza a prize worth fighting for, again and again, across the entire span of recorded history. This geographic significance was both blessing and curse. It brought wealth, cultural exchange, and cosmopolitan influences. It also brought conquest, destruction, and the constant presence of foreign powers seeking to exploit Gaza's strategic position. The people of Gaza learned early that survival meant adaptation. They would be conquered repeatedly. They would absorb influences from every direction. They would rebuild after every destruction. This pattern, established in the Bronze Age, continues to the present day. Human presence in the Gaza region extends back to prehistoric times, but the city enters recorded history as a significant urban center by approximately 1500 BCE. Egyptian records from the reign of Thutmose III mention Gaza as an important garrison town, a forward base for Egyptian campaigns into Canaan and beyond. The Egyptians called it Gazit, a name that has persisted with variations across 3.5 millennia to the present day. During the Late Bronze Age, Gaza served as an administrative center for Egyptian control over the southern Levant. Pharaohs appointed governors, stationed troops, and collected tribute from the surrounding region. The city grew wealthy from trade passing through its markets and from its role as an imperial outpost. The extent to which these and other heritage sites have survived recent violence remains difficult to assess. Access for archaeologists, conservators, and journalists has been severely restricted. Reports of damage to historic structures emerge, but comprehensive documentation is impossible under current conditions. What is certain is that every conflict degrades the accumulated heritage of 5 millennia. Stones that survived Assyrian sieges, Roman conquests, Crusader battles, and Ottoman centuries face modern explosives of unprecedented destructive power. The people of Gaza have developed cultural traditions that reflect both their particular circumstances and their connections to the broader Palestinian and Arab world. The Arabic dialect spoken in Gaza possesses distinctive features that linguists trace to the layered history of the region. Bedouin influences from the Negev and Sinai mingle with urban Palestinian speech patterns and borrowings from the many languages that have passed through this crossroads. Culinary traditions draw on the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern ingredients available in this coastal environment. Fish from the Mediterranean, citrus from local orchards, olive oil from ancient groves, and spices from trade routes all contribute to a cuisine that shares features with neighboring regions while maintaining local distinctiveness. Sumagia, a distinctive Gazan dish made with sumac, chard, and meat, represents the kind of hyper-local specialty that develops when communities maintain food traditions over generations. The dish appears rarely outside Gaza, a culinary marker of place as distinctive as any geographical boundary. Embroidery traditions, shared with Palestinian communities throughout the region, but featuring distinctive Gazan patterns and color preferences, represent artistic heritage passed from mothers to daughters across generations. The cross-stitch designs encode information about village origin, family status, and regional identity. The Day IBC, the traditional line dance performed at weddings and celebrations throughout the Levant, takes local forms in Gaza as in every Palestinian community. The steps, the rhythms, and the songs express both pan-Palestinian identity and specifically Gazan variations. These cultural practices persist, despite, or perhaps because of, the pressures of conflict and isolation. The preservation of tradition becomes an act of resistance when existence itself is threatened. The wedding celebration, the traditional recipe, the embroidered dress all assert continuity with ancestors and hope for descendants. The psychologist who has studied communities under prolonged stress recognizes these patterns. Cultural preservation provides meaning, structure, and identity when external circumstances seem designed to strip all three away. Gaza's cultural vitality, maintained under conditions that would seem to make culture impossible, demonstrates human capacity for meaning-making under the most extreme circumstances. Education has historically been highly valued in Palestinian society, and Gaza has produced scholars, writers, and intellectuals who have contributed to Arabic literature, Islamic scholarship, and various academic disciplines. The Islamic University of Gaza, founded in 1978, grew to become one of the significant higher education institutions in the Palestinian territories. Thousands of students pursued degrees in fields ranging from religious studies to engineering, their education continuing despite the restrictions and conflicts that periodically disrupted normal life. Al-Azhar University in Gaza, affiliated with the historic Al-Azhar in Cairo, provided another avenue for higher education. Smaller colleges and vocational institutions offered training in practical skills necessary for the local economy. The literacy rate in Gaza exceeded 95%, among the highest in the Arab world despite the poverty and restrictions that characterized daily life. Families sacrificed to educate children, viewing education as both intrinsic good and potential path to opportunities beyond the Strip's confined boundaries. Writers from Gaza have contributed to Palestinian literature, their work often reflecting the particular experience of life in this territory. Poets, novelists, and essayists have articulated perspectives shaped by siege, displacement, and the strange normalization of abnormal circumstances. The question of what survives from Gaza's educational and cultural institutions after recent events remains unanswered. Reports of damage to universities, schools, and libraries emerge, but comprehensive assessment is impossible. What took generations to build can be destroyed in moments. The economy of Gaza has been fundamentally shaped by the political circumstances that have defined life in the Strip for decades. Before the blockade, Gaza had fishing and agricultural sectors that, while modest, provided livelihoods for significant portions of the population. Citrus orchards, greenhouse vegetables, and Mediterranean fishing supported families whose economic activities connected them to both local and export markets. The restrictions imposed after 2007 progressively strangled these sectors. Fishing zones were limited to a few nautical miles from shore. Export of agricultural products became difficult or impossible. The materials needed for construction, manufacturing, and economic development were classified as dual-use items, with potential military applications, and therefore restricted. The tunnel economy that developed in response to the blockade, smuggling goods from Egypt through underground passages, became a major source of employment and commerce. The tunnels brought consumer goods, construction materials, and, critics alleged, weapons into the Strip. Their periodic destruction and the varying enforcement of the Egyptian border created boom-and-bust cycles in this shadow economy. Unemployment rates in Gaza ranked among the highest in the world. Youth unemployment exceeded 60% by some measures. The combination of rapid population growth, restricted economic opportunity, and limited ability to emigrate created conditions of chronic economic crisis. International aid became a major factor in Gaza's economy. United Nations agencies, international NGOs, and governmental aid programs provided food, healthcare, education, and other services that the local economy could not support. This aid dependency, while keeping the population alive, also created distortions and dependencies that complicated any path toward sustainable development. Hundreds of species pass through during spring and fall migrations, resting and feeding in the wetlands before continuing their journeys. The wetlands also recharged the coastal aquifer that provided Gaza's fresh water. This aquifer, the only significant source of fresh water for the territory, has been severely depleted and contaminated by decades of over-extraction and inadequate wastewater treatment. The United Nations declared the aquifer unfit for human consumption, yet it remains the primary water source for millions of people. The Mediterranean coast, approximately 40 kilometers of sandy beach, was once a recreational resource and fishing ground. Restrictions on movement, pollution from inadequate infrastructure, and conflict have progressively degraded what should be a valuable natural and economic asset. Agricultural land, limited in a territory of Gaza's size and population, has been further reduced by urban expansion, conflict, and the creation of buffer zones along borders. The olive and citrus groves that once characterized portions of the landscape have shrunk as pressures mounted. The environmental consequences of recent conflict will take years to assess. Unexploded ordnance, rubble contaminated with hazardous materials, destroyed water and wastewater systems, and the environmental impacts of massive displacement all create challenges that extend far beyond the immediate humanitarian crisis. The Palestinian refugee experience has defined Gaza's identity more than any other single factor of the modern era. The camps established in 1948 as emergency facilities for displaced persons became permanent features of the landscape, their populations growing with each generation. Joblia, the largest camp, housed over 100,000 registered refugees in an area of approximately 1.4 square kilometers before recent events. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, established in 1949 specifically to address the Palestinian refugee situation, became one of the largest employers and service providers in Gaza. UNRWA schools educated generations of children. UNRWA clinics provided healthcare. UNRWA distributed food rations to families registered as refugees. The refugee identity, maintained across generations born in Gaza who never saw the villages their grandparents fled, represents a particular form of displacement. Children grew up hearing stories of orange groves and Jaffa, of stone houses and villages whose names they knew but whose locations they could not visit. Keys to homes that no longer existed were preserved as symbols of return. This multi-generational refugee identity sets the Palestinian experience apart from most other refugee situations, where either return or resettlement typically occurs within years or decades of displacement. The frozen quality of the Palestinian refugee situation, maintained across 75 years, created a unique relationship to land, memory, and political aspiration. The question of whether refugee descendants should retain refugee status, and what rights that status confers, remains one of the most contentious issues in any discussion of Israeli-Palestinian peace. For Gaza's population, the majority of whom are registered refugees or descendants of refugees, this is not an abstract political question but a fundamental element of identity. The religious landscape of Gaza reflects centuries of Islamic predominance alongside small but historically significant minority communities. The overwhelming majority of Gaza's population is Sunni Muslim, their religious practice shaped by both traditional Palestinian Islam and the increasing influence of movements like Hamas, whose ideology combines Palestinian nationalism with Islamic religious politics. Mosques serve not only as places of worship, but as community centers, social service providers, and in some cases political organizing spaces. The construction of mosques, many funded by international Islamic charities, accelerated during the decades of Israeli occupation and continued after the Palestinian Authority and later Hamas assumed control. The Christian community in Gaza, never large in modern times, shrank dramatically during decades of conflict and emigration. The Greek Orthodox, Latin Catholic, and Baptist communities that maintained presences in Gaza faced the same pressures as their Muslim neighbors, compounded by minority status in an increasingly Islamized environment. The Church of St. Porphyrius and the Holy Family Catholic Church serve the remaining Christian population, estimated at around 1,000 before recent events. These communities, despite their small size, maintained connections to the broader Christian world and represented continuity with Gaza's ancient Christian heritage. The relationship between Hamas, as the governing authority in Gaza, and the Christian minority was complex. Official statements emphasized protection of Christian rights. Practical experience varied. Some Christians reported discrimination or pressure. Others described functional coexistence. The community's dramatic shrinkage over decades reflected push factors that included, but were not limited to, religious tensions. To speak of Gaza's future is to venture into territory where certainty is impossible and prediction borders on presumption. What can be said with certainty is that the territory and its people have experienced destruction on a scale unprecedented in their modern history. The physical infrastructure, the economic systems, the educational and healthcare institutions, and the cultural heritage that previous generations built have been devastated. The death toll, the displacement, the trauma inflicted on surviving populations will shape Gaza for generations. Just as the Nakba of 1948 shaped the generations since, children who survive will carry memories that no passage of time will fully erase. Communities will measure time as before and after, yet history offers a paradox. Gaza has been destroyed before. The Assyrians, Babylonians, Alexander the Great, and countless others conquered, burned, and depopulated this place, and yet people returned. Cities were rebuilt, life resumed. The geographic factors that made Gaza significant, the coastal location, the position on continental trade routes, the agricultural potential of the coastal plain, remained constant through every catastrophe. The people of Gaza, like peoples throughout history who have endured catastrophe, will seek to rebuild if given any opportunity to do so. The human impulse to reconstruct, to create normalcy, to provide for children, does not disappear even after the worst traumas. It may be suppressed, delayed, or distorted by circumstances, but it does not vanish. What political arrangements might permit rebuilding remains entirely uncertain. Whether the international community will provide the resources needed for reconstruction remains unknown. How the fundamental political conflicts that underlie the humanitarian catastrophe might be resolved, or whether they will simply continue in modified form, cannot be predicted. What endures is the land itself, the same Mediterranean coast that Philistines knew, the same soil that Egyptians, Romans, and Ottomans cultivated, the same geographical reality that made Gaza a crossroads when humans first built cities and will continue to make it significant for as long as humans inhabit this region. On a small strip of land where continents meet, where history has accumulated layer upon layer for 5 millennia, the present wounds lie atop wounds that eventually healed, which lay atop wounds that healed before them. Gaza is not merely a crisis. It is not merely a political problem. It is not merely a humanitarian catastrophe, though it is all of these things. Gaza is a place where people have lived, worked, worshipped, raised families, buried their dead, and hoped for their descendants across 5,000 years of recorded history and unknown millennia before. The Philistines who built temples to Dagon did not know that Romans would replace them. The Romans who constructed forums and hippodromes did not foresee the Christian transformation. The Byzantines who built churches did not anticipate the Arab conquest. The Ottomans who governed for 4 centuries could not imagine the transformations of the 20th and 21st centuries. Each generation confronted its circumstances, adapted as it could, and passed something to those who followed. The continuity of human presence itself constitutes a kind of meaning, a testament to the persistence of life in this narrow strip where geography imposed both blessing and curse. The people of Gaza today inherit all of this history. They are Philistine, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Ottoman, and Palestinian. They carry within them the accumulated experience of every generation that lived, suffered, and celebrated on this same ground. Their story is not over. History does not end with any particular chapter, however catastrophic. New chapters will follow. The content of those chapters remains to be written by choices not yet made, by actors not yet born, by circumstances not yet formed. What we can say is that Gaza has endured before. The same stubborn persistence that rebuilt after Assyrian conquest, after Alexander's siege, after Crusader battles, after every previous catastrophe continues to exist in the people who remain and in the diaspora scattered across the world. This is not optimism. The suffering is too great for simple optimism. It is simply observation. Human beings have returned to this place after every destruction. There is no reason to believe that pattern will not continue, whatever forms it takes. The teardrop of Sri Lanka bleeds from civil war. The cradle of Iraq bleeds from invasion and occupation. The ancient land of Syria bleeds from internal conflict, and the small strip of Gaza bleeds from wounds layered upon wounds. But the land remains, the history remains. The people, however scattered and traumatized, remain, and history, that patient accumulator of human experience, continues its endless work of recording what happens in this place where Africa meets Asia, where ancient roots converge, where 5,000 years of human presence testify to the stubborn persistence of life itself. Thank you for joining us throughout today's journey on Travel Vibes. The small strip of land with the long history awaits whatever comes next. It has no choice but to wait. It never has.